Welcome to Pod and Roku TV's World Edition. I'm Steve Rao, the host of the show, and I greet you live in the All-America city of Morrisville in North Carolina, the 8th largest city in the United States of America. Today, we're going to talk about a number of issues going on. Donald Trump's Facebook and Instagram accounts getting back to him. We're going to talk about the economy, which has rebounded stronger than we thought, and other issues around the world, including the debt ceiling here in the U.S. But today I want to begin my monologue to talk about two important days that we celebrate today. The first is India Republic Day. On January 26, 1950, India, who had been independent for 3 years, they won their independence in 1947, ratified and signed their constitution, officially making them a republic, a democracy, a true democracy, and really separated themselves from the British Raj rule of the British Empire. 72 years after the Republic Day in India, we're looking at today the world's largest democracy. We're looking at India being the 5th largest economy and an ever increasingly important ally of the United States of America in a relatively unstable Southeast Asia with China, North Korea, and heightened tensions between Pakistan and India, which always continue. India is a vast, diverse nation with music and dialects that go every state across the nation. I feel that every day in Morrisville. And so the diversity is one of its greatest strengths, but also can pose one of its greatest challenges. That's always been a challenge for India, but Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister, has made it his mission to unite India, to really invest in their infrastructure, to invest in broadband, to invest in a knowledge-based economy. And I truly believe that this has really put India on the map and has made them solidify themselves as a power that will one day be an emerging major power in the world as the 5th largest economy. So we will talk about that. And I want to thank every Indian American around the world, around the country, in the United States for their remarkable contributions. Who would have ever thought that an Indian Brit would become the Prime Minister of a Western nation, Rishi Sunak? That would have been unimaginable 72 years ago, at the beginning or inception of Indian independence. Now, we also today, we are expecting possibly some guests to talk about the U.S.-India relationship. But if not, it'll just be my panel with me today, and we'll bring in those guests next week. We have Australia Day, and Shaquille Latimer will be talking about that today. This day celebrates 1788, and I'm going to have Shaquille talk about that. But we want to thank Australia for all that they bring to the world. We're glad to have Shaquille Latimer on the show. I hope I can go to Australia. And speaking of Australia, they also host one of the major Grand Slams in my favorite sport, tennis. And we're going to be watching the semifinals tonight. And for the first time, an American in a long time is in the semifinals of the Australian Open. Tommy Paul from Greenville, North Carolina, believe it or not. So let's get started. We're going to go ahead and begin our conversation with India, Australia, and then talk today about some other events going around the world.
Glad to join you. We've got myself here, and of course, we've got Lee Newton Rhodes, and I think Dan Worthington is here as well. And like you said, Shaquille will be joining at some point or another also. But definitely, I know a lot of folks are paying attention to what's going on. And of course, those are two powerhouse countries that exist and all in that way. So definitely,
Well, yes. And we're going to begin the conversation. I'm going to put my hat as an analyst today. This is good practice for me to talk about U.S. India. I did reach out to Mr. Chatterjee. He could not make it today. And Sanjay Puri, who runs U.S. Impact, we'll probably bring him on next week. So it'll be a delayed talk about U.S. India. But I want to begin with what Dan Worthington has asked. Is, India, likes to play it both ways, the caste system and the poor, which is, there's still a lot of poverty. But I want to put things in perspective. Today, India, when my parents came in 1968, there was no middle class in India. You were either very wealthy or poor. But today, the middle class is rising over 400 million. So it's amazing. That's what you feel in India. More and more people buying cars, more and more people having jobs, women working as well as men. A lot of energy in India, and that wealth is being distributed quicker to those that are poorer. So I think eventually you are going to see less poverty in India. The infrastructure is really improving. The second thing to notice about India, and I'd love to get your all perspectives about this, is that today 75% of the nation of India is under the age of 35. When you go to India, you see CEOs of companies that are 40, 41. Last evening, I was going to close with this, but I had the honor of meeting the mayor of Hyderabad, the 11th largest city in the world, in India, the 5th largest city in India, and 10 million people in that city, and a young 41-year-old mayor, 40, maybe 45. And so that energy is actually many people thinking going in India's favor, because America is going the opposite. We're getting older. 60% of our country is over 65. So anyway, but Dan, that's a good point. And I think from a foreign policy as well, we often see India kind of playing it both ways, not really coming down on China, on Russia.
Steve, good morning.
Oil, and they've been allies with the Union for many years. So anyway, before we get to Australia, I wanted to kind of have this talk about India.
Steve, just one question about the demographics of America and the aging. When was it taken, those statistics? And also with the recent influx of immigrants, is it not getting younger and younger every year?
Well, I think I'll have to go get the figures, but that's from a book I read about a couple of years ago called Regeneration, and I'll have to get the source. But there is the reason we have and so the data is pretty accurate. Part of the problem,
I understand it, but it's also dated, and not to say it's not incorrect, but with all the influx from the southern border, I think our nation's getting younger and younger every year as we get flooded with new immigrants.
Yeah, but the problem is we're staying older much longer because of healthcare. So, the irony is that
darn healthcare.
We live longer, right? So the average expectancy is going up to like 70, 75, people living longer. And so, that's an interesting thing. Keeping people alive longer is actually driving up the healthcare cost.
That's not the case everywhere in the United States. We know that there's a number of states now where the average life expectancy is dropping because of fentanyl overdoses.
Yeah, that's true. That is changing, but it's not.
That's a significant problem. If you've got life expectancy dropping because such a large percentage of young people are dying from fentanyl overdoses, that is a huge problem. And I think that cocaine is something which is a party drug used by people all over the Western world. When you're seeing fentanyl overdoses because of fentanyl being mixed in with cocaine, and you're seeing that in the United States and Canada, it's only a matter of time before you start seeing that happening in Europe and in places like Australia. So I think we need to have a response to that. We can't just sit there and say that the society is getting younger. That doesn't seem to be the case.
Well, tell me. So let me ask you something. I'm just before we get to Australia Day, because Shaquille, I want you to talk a little bit of that. I want you all as analysts, and I'm going to start with Shaquille. What do you think the United States foreign policy should be towards India? Where do you see India fitting into all the things we're talking about in the world? Because so much of the oxygen is being taken by Russia, by China. We talk about autocracy and dictatorships. What is going to work with India? What is not going to work? Where do you see the opportunities?
Well, I'm not an expert on India, obviously, but what I will say is that I think America and the West believed that if they traded with China and allowed China to basically do the manufacturing, and we in the West would buy off them, that China would become more like us in the West, and we got that wrong. China didn't have any appetite for that. I think it's a little bit different for India. India does seem to be wanting to improve their lives and have the kind of lifestyles that we enjoy in the West. The caste system is obviously still going to be part of Indian culture, even if it's not part of the law anymore. That's still going to be something that I think India has to grapple with. But I think that predominantly we need to be looking at two-way trade with India, and we need to make sure that we are treating India fairly. There's been complaints, for example, about Monsanto, giving seeds and stuff to farmers and making these deals with these poor farmers that are illiterate, don't really understand what they're signing, and then they lose their farms, and they kill themselves and that sort of stuff. So I think that we need to make sure that we are treating the Indian people fairly. We also have to make sure that we are trading with them and encouraging them to trade on terms that are in line with our values. If we don't, then that void is going to be met by other countries. And certainly with India being a significant member of the BRICS nations, we would like to see India be more aligned with us than be aligned with the BRICS alliance, if you want to call it that.
Shaquille, I got a question for you, and it's based on what you just said, and I'm not saying that I know because I've never been to China. I might have had family members that have been there and everything, but I oftentimes hear people say that the Chinese influence, and I don't doubt that they have influence on other parts of the world, but they make it seem as if China has not been westernized. And every time I turn around and I've talked to people, including some from China, they talk about, McDonald's being over there. They talk about some of our corporations being over there. They talk about how much they enjoy our corporations and even some of our culture and have been influenced by some of our culture. So I'm wondering, is it fair to say that China has not had some westernized parts of what is going on? I'm not saying that they are not a communist nation. It's very clear that they are a communist nation, but it does seem like in terms of the common people that they have definitely had some influences from the Chinese, from the American corporations, and American corporations are going there because there is a large amount of people over there. So you definitely want to reach that amount of folks and everything. So I'm wondering, is it now almost disingenuous to say that we have not been influencing some of their politics as well?
Well, I don't think so. That would be like Australia trying to say that we've Australianized America because of the Outback chain of restaurants. I mean, the fact that there's some American restaurants and shops in China, that doesn't mean that you've westernized China. Of course, it's a big economy. Of course, they're going to purchase some things from us. But I think when people talk about westernizing things, it's really got to do with government control versus free markets. And China doesn't have a free market system. You can still make a lot of money in China. You can still become very wealthy in China. But their system of doing things is different to what we're used to seeing here in the West. So, if I wanted to start a business in America, I can just go start a business in America. I don't need to get an American involved. I don't need to, get special government permissions and all that sort of stuff. I just have to follow the same rules as anybody else would have to follow. That's a little bit different in China. It's a little bit different in parts of the Middle East as well, where you have to have a local be involved in the business. So, look, I won't criticize China for that. There's positives and negatives to it. I'm used to a more free market system. I think China, feels as though if they let the market be completely, free and unregulated, then what will happen is that there'll be too much of a wealth shift to the high performers, and it will leave everybody else worse off. That's a decision for the Chinese to make. As I said, I prefer a more free market system. But, I don't think that we've been able to persuade either China or most other countries that aren't already Western countries. I don't think we've been able to persuade them that they should become so. India is a little bit different. Again, second largest population in the world. I think that India wants to have a more westernized type of economy and political system. And that's something that I think they look forward to. And that probably, is heavily influenced by the British influence in India from decades ago.
Shaquille?
Indians just generally want.
a lot of manufacturing, a lot of companies go to China not to sell. They're going there to manufacture because it's not an even playing field in terms of labor laws and different regulations.
Well, I don't think that that's quite the case as much anymore, Lee. I think it used to be the case. The reality is that the cost of manufacturing, as far as labor is concerned, is not that much cheaper in China than other places. And once you account for transportation costs, etc., the cost savings are not quite as significant. That where you do get cost savings is where you've got access to resources at a cheaper rate, especially when we're talking about introducing carbon taxes and things like that. China is not, is not having those same rules that we're having, so they're not putting the same sorts of restrictions on their businesses. But you see that China is losing some of their labor jobs to places like Bangladesh and other parts of Asia which are a lot cheaper. So I don't think it's just labor costs. And the other thing is that the Chinese people like to buy Western goods. There's a Prada store here in Sydney City, for example, and they sell out anytime that a new product's launched. It's sold out within a couple of days because Chinese people will come to Australia, they'll buy them up, and they'll take them back home. A very significant thing is that we're not selling to them. We don't sell the things that they actually want from us, and it doesn't make any sense because from the Chinese perspective, they work or they have worked, they've accumulated wealth, and then when they try to spend it, they can't spend it on anything. And what do? They end up buying debt. That's not healthy, So, I think that we could increase trade with China. But you're right what you say. People aren't going there generally to sell. People are going there in order to, manufacture something or acquire something cheaper and then sell it elsewhere in the world. But that model, I think, will start to change over time.
Yeah.
In terms of going to other countries like Bangladesh or coming back home.
I think the model of going over to China in order to hope to get manufacturing done cheaper, I think that model will start to change over time because the Chinese are becoming wealthy.
That's a good. So before we get to Australia Day, I think the other thing to realize about India is that the U.S.-India Civil Nuclear Agreement, which was signed by George W. Bush, president, that's been big for India to have more nuclear capability. They have a very strong military. So I think that my grandfather was in the British and then Indian Army, but the Indian Army is strong, and they're developing a lot more aircraft, airports, modernization. So I think it's a good.
Is that a positive thing though? From our perspective here in the West, is it positive for us to see other large countries, and India is a large country, certainly just on population size? Do we want to see them with a really strong military while our military services appear to be stretched, appear to be focusing on things that are not military?
Well, I think it's in some ways it's good, right? I mean, if we have an ally with India, we do have to strengthen our military. Part of the problem is, I know Dan Worthington's a veteran, but the biggest problem we're having, and I heard a presentation recently, is that recruiting. People are having a hard time passing their physicals, their equivalency tests to get into the military. And so we're not seeing, so I think it's important.
Hold on a second. Sorry, I've got to say something here. When you've got, the LGBTQ affirmative action type situation, and you say to a kid, listen, you didn't run the beep test quick enough, so you're not getting in. But if you're gay or you put a dress on, we're going to lower the standards to let you in. That doesn't help, right? That's not, India's not doing that. And it's one thing for you to say, well, if India is an ally, well, Russia was an ally of the United States there for a little while, theoretically, in the 90s. But, these alliances can change. Allies that are natural allies, like the Five Eyes nations, it's a little bit different. India, because it's part of the Commonwealth, probably will be okay. But I'm not sure that a country like the United States wants to be too reliant on alliances, new military alliances with countries, because you can't necessarily rely on them. Do you think that India would jump in behind the United States to go into a conflict in the Middle East? I seriously doubt that would be likely to happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good point. I mean, and I think economically, before we get to Australia, lots of new markets for India. I mean, lots of entrepreneurs, energy. I'm going to close out today with the meeting with the mayor of Hyderabad. But she did mention that, the sustainability and green technologies are things that India does need. because there's just so much waste still and litter on the streets, and they really need help with recycling. So I think there'll be opportunities for us to sell into that market, which would be good for the U.S. economy, while at the same time getting foreign direct investment in. So we've had a lot of Indian companies invest, like Infosys, like HCL, like Cognizant, in Charlotte. So only time will tell, right? But let's shift to Australia before we get into some national and world events. So Shaquille, tell us about Australia Day. Why do we have Australia Day? What's the historical significance, and what it means to you?
Well, it doesn't really mean that much to me, but Australia Day is the landing of the first fleet in Australia in 1788. So that's what we celebrate, or this year what everyone's not celebrating apparently, but that's what it signifies. And I think it's it's a day for Australians to remember our history, to celebrate what it means to be Australian. And I think as somebody, I was born here, but as somebody whose parents immigrated to this country, Australia is one of those very few countries where, you can actually become Australian, just like you can become American or Canadian. There's not a lot of countries you can do that. I can't become Italian. You know what I mean? I can't become Chinese because it's a nationality. Whereas, our first world countries and new countries, we, a melting pot of different cultures that have all come together to build a country. And I think that's fantastic. It's something that we should definitely celebrate. And we up until this year have been doing that.
That's interesting. Well, Australian Open is going on right now. I want to go to Australia, to Melbourne one day to watch it, but they moved it back. I haven't been able to watch a lot. I'm going to have to go watch it. It's been on and odd times.
Shaquille, there are protests down in Australia now. What's that all about?
Well, it's this left-wing lunacy that tried to destroy every kind of thing that could keep the fabric of society together. So basically what it's about is the Indigenous population of Australia saying that this is Invasion Day or Survival Day, that sort of thing. And of course, we get all the political left that just, if it's an attack on society, let's just go with it. And so that's what these protests are about. Now, I actually do understand where the Indigenous cultures are coming from. But most of their complaints has been because of a lack of real acknowledgement in Australia. What Australia should do is pull its head out of its ass and give these people a treaty like every other country has done with their Indigenous people, rather than us going around the world and lecturing every other country, including us having lectured the United States about its treatment of Indigenous people. And then after we get all the other countries in the world to agree to do something, we come back to Australia and then we don't do it ourselves. It's ridiculous. So, the problem is that, the Indigenous people have been asking for a treaty for so long, and the politicians turn around, they go, well, what about if we give you constitutional recognition? What if we give you, this or that? And now they're talking about, what if we give you an Indigenous voice to Parliament? How about you stop mucking around and just give them a treaty, okay, and let them have some sovereignty over their own internal dealings, okay, and then we can sort of move on a little bit as a country. But unfortunately, at the moment, we're seeing things like, Western Australia, which is where I was born, has cancelled the fireworks for Australia Day. It's the first time that's happened. So now there's no more fireworks to celebrate Australia Day. And a lot of pubs and hotels are not putting anything on for Australia Day. And Kmart has banned the sale of all Australia Day merchandise from their shops.
Let me get this
My
right.
response to that is, hey, Kmart, that's okay. If you don't like Australia, I've got no problems with that. Piss off. Go somewhere else. Shut your stores down and get out. Okay? I'm sick and tired of people coming to Australia or going to the United States and just attack as if there's nothing good about our countries.
But one big question I had to ask you based on what you just said and everything is, and Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong since you have some native blood as well. But that being said, I want to say that just about all the nations of Native American populations here in the United States have some degree of sovereignty. So if I'm hearing you correctly, that is not the case there in Australia, because I want to say that most of the tribes here have some degree of sovereignty over some of their territories, and that's not just
that's right. That's because also in Canada. That's because you guys have a treaty with your First Nations. We don't, and we're the only country I'm aware of that doesn't. Just like I'm the only country that I'm aware of that doesn't have a Bill of Rights. But these are uniquely Australian issues. The problem is that the people out there protesting, if you go and ask them, well, what is it that you actually think we should do? They don't actually have an answer. So it's just about attacking, which is your original question, why are people protesting? They're just protesting for the sake of attacking Australia.
Yeah.
And I think it's pathetic, especially when you see that these are white kids that are living in inner city Melbourne and inner city Sydney, going to University of Sydney or Monash University. This is like our equivalent of UCLA and Berkeley. It's like, guys,
Well, Shaquille, this may actually shock you, but yeah, that is a problem that I do see that we may agree on, which is that there are a number of people that are wearing shirts, wearing pictures, wearing a number of other things. And if you ask them about the people that they are honoring, whoever those people are, whether it's Che Guevara or Malcolm X or a number of other folks, I'd even say some of the Proud folks as well, they couldn't tell you anything about them.
Yeah, exactly. But this is the thing. This is why it becomes very hard to take seriously what they say. You have these kids screaming and carrying on about this and that. So people, when kids say, "Oh, I'm a Marxist. I think Marxism is great." Like, okay, well, what do you think so good about Marxism? They're like, I'm like, well, do you know? Like, do you know what Marxism is about?
We get free stuff.
Yeah, we get free stuff. Like they just have no idea. And
we don't have to get off our dead asses and work. Hey.
Yeah, right. And the thing is that Marxism isn't like that anyway.
No, I know.
Marxism is what's the core tenet there, right? To each according to their need, from each according to their ability, right? Well, you don't have that, do you? You have people on social security benefits that draw down money from the taxpayer that don't bother to work, who are more than capable of working. That's why, if you remember a couple of years ago when I said, look, those people that want socialism, give it to them. No problems, give it to them. Just make sure that they understand that the socialist, for those of us who want the free market, give us the free market. If you want socialism, here you go. You get it. But just remember, you no longer have any say over your life. You don't get to choose who you're going to marry. You don't get to choose how many kids you're going to have. You don't get to choose what jobs you're going to do. You don't get to choose what you're going to study at university. We will make that decision for you, because that's what socialism means. That other people make the decision for you.
But Shaquille and Lee and everybody else here, I guess the question I've got to ask in that regards is, how many truly free market societies are there in the world? How many truly socialistic societies are there in the world? Because most societies, to me, seem to be a mix. I would even say that the U.S. is a mix between socialism and capitalism.
Of course, they're mixed, but there's no mix of socialism there. There are socialized services, right? But people aren't asking for socialized services. They're asking for socialism. That's what all the celebrities are jumping up and down about, saying that they want socialism. So unless the celebrities are going to admit that they don't know what they're talking about, take them at their word. You want socialism, Mr. Celebrity? Fine. You're not earning $30 million a film. We're going to take all the money from you and give it to all the extras that were in that film. Stop being ridiculous. I understand that there is a desire for more socialized services, more access to education, healthcare, and things like that. Okay. But if you're not prepared to tax yourselves the way that Sweden taxes themselves, stop complaining and blaming the wealthiest people in society for the fact that your kid can't go to Harvard without getting a $300,000 debt like every other kid does.
No, but Shaquille, I got to come back, and I'm actually going to come back to another part that we were talking about this time, China and everything, because one of the things that I was hearing about China was that they are actually trying to win over Westerners and private firms. Apparently, for the first time in several years, Marvel is getting ready to go over to be shown in the Chinese cinemas. So they are definitely trying to win over folks in from our side of the world. And apparently,
how is that winning over? How is that winning over the Western world? Having a woke media company show a woke film in China.
Well, I mean, I guess they're trying to show some of the different businesses and everything.
Hey,
and that's one of their.
that's a good segue into the next. Well, let me, Mark. I want to just bring a couple of issues that now we move into.
I mean, if they want to win over the West, why don't they bring over the Mormon Tabernacle Choir or orchestra or something. Why don't they bring some
They've
Christian
been there.
conservatives over and
They've been there.
see how they go.
Yeah, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir has been over to China. A couple of other folks have been over there, and as Dan just said, they've been there. But by the way, one of their leaders said, if we work hard enough, the Chinese economy will see a significant improvement in 2023. And he pledged more focus on supporting private business. And then he said, China's national reality dictates that opening up to the world is a must, not an expediency. So he said that they must open up and make it work better. So apparently that's their plea to get more of our stuff out there, including Disney and all that.
Well, I mean, I think the people in Hong Kong would beg to differ, considering the actions there over the last few years. But
So real quickly, Donald Trump is being given access back by Meta for his Instagram and Facebook accounts. So that's good news for Donald Trump, President Trump. He's going to have this big base. We're going to talk about that. The other thing, when we talk about woke movements, more liberal movements, it is interesting that the state of Florida's Department of Education has rejected an AP Black History course. All kinds of protests going on. Once again, DeSantis, I think, using the state that he runs on these conservative issues, I think, which play well to his base. But that's going to be interesting. And
hang on. Sorry, Steve, I can't let that slide. What do you mean? What do you mean he's using his state? No. His state voted for him because he took these stances. He didn't get in there and then just start going off half-cocked on some like wild, conservative thing like AOC did when she got in.
Yeah, I'm just stating a fact. It's Florida is really pushing against some of these things. I mean, I don't see a problem with teaching an AP Black History course.
I see that as a good thing.
But Steve,
what's in the curriculum?
It doesn't matter what
does that mean? Black history.
It doesn't matter what
it's a critical race theory.
If the people of Florida don't want it, if the people of Florida don't want it, the people of Florida have every right to say to government, we want this out of our school system. If the parents in Florida don't want their kids learning this, it doesn't matter whether you have a problem with it or not. It matters whether the parents of those kids have a problem with it or not. Let them make the decision. What's wrong with that?
I mean, by that same token, I mean, we could go there and cherry pick U.S. history and world history all day long. And there are parts of the U.S. history that folks might not want to be taught and things of that nature. I mean, there are folks that might be complaining about learning about George Washington and Abraham Lincoln. I'm not one of those. I actually like those historical figures, but there are folks that you can cherry pick history all day long and everything. So
this is coming from somebody who believes in critical race theory and
I never said that I believed in critical race theory. I said that critical race theory is coming back to what Lee said. Critical race theory is a higher form of education that is involved in the college level. Most people will even tell you that critical race theory isn't actually taught on the lower school levels and things of that nature. It's usually taught in the college levels and all of that.
You can say that.
Black history, which is actually American history, should be taught all the time. There's a lot of Black history figures that are not known. How many schools are teaching about Frederick Douglass?
What? They were in my days.
In your days they were, but I don't think a lot are now.
Just because
or Harriet Tubman or Sojourner Truth or a number of others.
Mark, just because
learn all about that stuff and Kate as well.
Right. Just because you support something doesn't mean that you're right. Okay, so when you say, "Oh, other people are cherry picking history to make their points," that's exactly what you're doing. That's exactly what the 1660 Project does. You want to cherry pick little bits and pieces out. And then you want to try and create something else, like you've lectured me about the 3/5 compromise, as if it's such a great insult to people of color in America that you are considered to be 3/5. Despite
it was an insult. I mean, that's why Floyd McKissick, who was a great man, was actually involved in writing that book and everything. It wasn't an insult.
In order to
better than not being
down the vote of the South, in order to promote the ending of slavery. But no, let's rewrite that into somehow that was some slight against African Americans. You want to cherry pick history all the time.
Of African Americans. There was a whole property thing and everything, and no African American or nobody of any sort wants to be seen as property.
Wow, what a groundbreaking statement that you made, Mark.
That's not a racial issue, though. That's every race. Nobody.
Obviously, nobody does. But when you want to complain about the 3/5 compromise,
you get a W.
Exactly. And I've asked you this, and I've asked other people that have been on here, what exactly would you propose the North would have done And you don't have an answer for it because it doesn't fit the narrative that you've got that America tried to reduce you to only 3/5 of a person, which isn't quite what they did either. All they did was they said they were only going to count 3/5 of the population in order to
You're talking about a time that people are being counted as property and being counted as livestock, and that is not cool any way, anyhow, any kind of way. So you cannot say that's going to be cool, and that was actually what was going on during slavery. They were counted as livestock.
Mark,
didn't
is
count
there
the other
somebody arguing
livestock.
against that? I made a very specific point about the 3/5 compromise, and because you don't have a response to that, you change the topic onto livestock and being property. Okay,
I'm not changing the
You don't
topic.
have
I'm saying that
so-
Floyd McKissick, who was actually had
as I said, you want to
Floyd
try,
McKissick
you
was
want to try
actually
and cherry
written.
pick history.
His son
You
was
wanna
actually
try
here on
and
the
cherry
show,
pick history,
wrote
you
the
do it,
book
but
about
don't
this
lecture
and
us.
everything, or at least involved in that thing in the terms of the book and all in that way. I'm not going to answer a question that you're going to throw me with a red herring kind of type deal and all into that space.
What
You're right. If I don't have an
red herring
immediate
deal?
answer, I'm not going to give you an
I've
immediate answer.
stated-
I'm
I've
just going to
stated
sit
to
there
you
and
very
answer
clearly.
without any facts behind me and everything. That would be
Let's get back
asinine,
on topic.
and I'm not an
Mark.
asinine person.
Mark,
Let's get
I
back
stated
on
to you
topic.
very, very clear facts. It's not the first time you've heard me say this. The 3/5 compromise was designed to make sure that the South could not vote slavery in. Okay, that's why they did it. It wasn't
That
something
was
that
not
they
the
wanted
only
to
reason
do
they
in the
did it.
North.
There are counter arguments, but I don't have the counter arguments in
If
front
you're
of me, so I'm
gonna
not going to
talk-
sit here and
if
have
you're
you give me the counter
gonna
arguments
talk
when I don't
over
have
me,
the
then
counter
don't
argument to
complain
give
if you
you.
don't have any
That's like a
information.
debate thing where you're trying to bring up a topic, and if I don't have the answers, I'm not going to sit there and throw an answer at you just
You don't
randomly.
need
That
to.
would be stupid.
You don't need to throw an answer, but you were the one. You're the one that wants to sit there and complain about it. So you complain about something. I tell you, well, hang on a second. This is why it was done, and then you want to try and change the topic
You weren't
because
there.
you say you don't have enough information.
You don't
I'm
know
not
it
So
was
changing
clearly,
the
there.
topic.
clearly
Neither
when
one
it
of us
comes to
was
someone
there and
cherry
everything.
picking
So, like I
history,
said, I'm not changing the topic,
yeah.
and neither one
So
of
when
us
it
was
comes
there
to someone
in
cherry
that
picking
sense.
history,
You brought
I
up some
think we
facts
know.
that you found
I
and
think we know
everything.
which
I can bring
side
up some
does
facts
that.
that I found, but I'm not going to do that right now because I don't have those directly
knock
in
it
front of me.
off.
I could go dig
Mark,
up some books and everything,
Mark,
including some people that I know, and all in
Mark,
that
this is
space.
just-
So I'm not going to get into this tit for tat with you and
No,
all in
no,
this
no,
kind of
no,
space,
Mark,
Shaquille.
Mark,
Actually, I'm
you're
going to
gonna-
actually
Mark,
move
this is
on to another
nonsense.
topic, like I was
We're
going to
gonna
do
have
in the
to-
first place and
this is
everything.
nonsense.
Here's
So
the
We're
guy.
gonna
stop
go
it,
back.
Shaquille.
I mean-
Stop it. We're not going
No,
into
I'm
that
not going to
discussion
stop
and
it. This is
everything. I
absolute
just said stop
nonsense.
it. We're not going into that discussion without
No.
me having the background for the discussion to go
Then
into.
don't.
I was
Then
going
sit
to
there and
ask
be
Steve the
quiet.
question about
Mark,
Mr.
then sit
Hey,
there
how
and be
you
quiet.
doing
Let
today,
Dan
by the way?
Wait,
sit there and be
Mark,
quiet,
take
and then
back
let
control.
Dan, Lee, and myself
Huh?
talk about it.
Take
Then
back control and
okay?
give me a question.
You want to accuse?
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
Steve
hold on a
wants to
second.
go
I've had
off.
a question for I had a
Steve,
question
Steve wants
for
to go
Steve
off
and everything. So we're not
on Ron
we're turning
DeSantis.
back the
You
controls
want
over
to
to Steve.
talk about
Okay.
talk
Hey,
about
hey.
history, and then when I say something about it, then you want to get upset about it.
I'm not going to
You know,
I'm
so
not
what
going
nonsense
to
is
sit
that?
into a
So real
debate when
quickly-
I don't have the arguments to go
Let's
into
go
the
Then why
back.
debate
did you make the
and all of
comment
that.
if you
So
don't have
we're
the
not
facts?
going there, Shaquille. We're not
Then
going
why
there.
did you make the comment if you don't have the facts? And why do you make the comment in the first place? This is the
Because I
reason
was
why. This is the
responding to
reason
what
why
you
young
said
kids in
and
Australia
everything
don't
like
want to
that, but we're
celebrate
not
Australia
getting into
Day
this argument
because the
right
people
in
like
this
you that
particular
want to
time
sit there
and all in
have a
that way.
whinge,
So stop
and then
that,
when you
Shaquille.
get called on it, then you want to sit there and go, "Well, I don't have the facts.
Stop
I
it,
don't know
Shaquille.
what
We're
I'm
not going there.
God
We're
bless
not going there.
America.
Neither one of us were there to Dan's point
Land
and all
of
in that
the
way.
free.
So I'm
Steve,
taking back control.
Steve,
Guys, I got to
Steve.
leave in a few minutes, but I'm taking back control of the
And
show.
Yes, thank you. And Steve,
Let's talk a
the
little bit
question I
about.
had for you was Manchin, because Manchin is apparently going and come up with a solution for Social Security, because we were talking about the aging population and everything, and apparently he's come up with a partial fix. He's
I
saying
didn't
that
think
he
we were
wants
talking
to
about
change by
aging
raising the cap
at
on
all.
payroll taxes
Oh,
in order to make, and I
aging.
know Shaquille's
Okay.
going to love this, higher earners contribute more to the program's
Forget about it,
reserve.
we're older.
So
What a groundbreaking idea!
Let's
I've
focus-
never heard of that one before. Let's soak the rich. What a brilliant idea! Genius, genius.
I think it's a good
He's
idea.
the only person that came up with that idea. Let's have the rich contribute a bit more.
They
well,
should.
Manchin told during the State of the Union address that he believes that providing more money for the program in this manner will ensure that beneficiaries continue to get their payments. The new revenue would also ease government overspending on this major line item, thus at least partially alleviating the debt ceiling crisis. That's what he was claiming and all of that. But hey, this is one of your folks, Steve. So what are your thoughts
Hey.
about this? Because apparently, per the Social Security Administration, every American worker and their employer offers 6.2% of their pay toward the program, up to $160,200 in 2023, while self-employed workers pay a more substantial 12.4% of their wages, since no employer co-pays. So therefore, if you're a millionaire, you will have met the 161 160, 200 cap around February of every year, and that's part of what he's going into. But it's your boy, Mr. Manchin. So, what are your thoughts around what he's proposing? Because he just put this out there
You say,
recently.
I
you
don't
said
know
that
enough
he's his
about it.
boy.
That's what he said.
I heard
Mark, what's he proposing?
He's come up with a partial fix. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin wants to change the way in which Social Security is funded, notably raising the cap on payroll taxes in order to make the highest earners contribute more to the program's reserves. That is what
Good for him. Joe's actually leaning to the left today. You know, he sort of goes with the wind, but he's playing a Democratic base. You know, he's got to get reelected as a U.S. senator. He's got a target on his head. There's a rumor out there he's running for governor, which I think would be a good move on him to, there's not many Democrats left in West Virginia, but, so but every now and then he's got to throw a carrot out there to show that he's still a Democrat,
You need him in the
but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just he is a Democrat, a moderate Democrat, and that's just his belief. But that's a good segue into the economy. I mean, interesting enough, they just reported recently released report, the economy's growing by 2.1%. So what does that mean? I mean, does that I guess that means that the interest rate hikes aren't working to slow down the economy as aggressively as they thought. Does that mean that as we have
that's not what it means.
What does it mean then when they say
It means
that?
that we're underperforming the
Okay.
benchmarks.
Okay. So we're just underperforming. But what does it mean?
That means
how
that Biden sucks and his
No, but
policy.
how quickly will inflation come down as we continue to raise the interest rates?
No, see, the performance of the economy is a good thing. It doesn't have to do with prices, although inflation is still historically high because of the Biden policies, the taxing of the American people into abject poverty, which is what the Democrats want, so they can qualify for more of their spendthrift programs, right? I mean, it's kind of and gain more control. Democrats have this idea that if you could subject more of the American people to their programs and their giveaways, that they get more votes. That's what their idea is. So this is we're seeing this destroying of America. So, Trump had Make America Great. Biden has Make America Weak. It's Make America Week. You celebrate.
Yeah.
Dan, are we seeing more and more companies downsizing, laying off massive workers?
Oh yeah, and this is another result of the Biden financial policies, massive downsizing of companies and unemployment. We're going to see this is a direct reaction to the financial decisions that have been made by the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve, which is taxing the American people to no end. I mean, the interest rates have gotten ridiculous. At a level of all-time debt in America, now all the people who are paying for variable loans are paying out the yin-yang. We're going to see something similar to what happened in 2008 in the housing market. We're heading for another crash because of these idiot Democrats. But it's all absolutely foreseeable. It's like watching a train wreck happening right in front of your face. But and I don't know why they're doing it.
Hey, Dan, speaking about watching train wrecks happening and all in that space, there is and I'm going to come back to our favorite whipping boy and everything, China. There is a part of what goes on with China that we don't really have that much control over and everything. There was actually an article published earlier today that said it could be a major problem because apparently they have a lot of rare earth supplies there in that big nation. And there was an article recently that said that China could shut down our military in a minute if we don't fix the looming rare earth supply crisis. And that apparently almost happened back in 2010 and all in that space. Now there is an ally of ours that apparently has discovered a huge deposit of rare metals, even though I think that they are considered to be a neutral country. But Sweden is discovered something, and that could be a potential step in Europe's dependency on China. But what is our thoughts around this? Because apparently, they can do a lot of stuff in the sense of shutting down things if they've got that much control. Fortunately, Sweden has now discovered something, and hopefully that'll make things better. And I think there's some
Beltway initiative
in Africa as well.
Because of the Beltway Initiative, China has systematically gone around the world and tried to control all strategic minerals in nations that produce them. That's part of their plan. Again, the Chinese have a plan, we don't. They have been aggressively pursuing rare earth minerals and other kinds of minerals for many, many years. And while the United States has sat on their thumbs and not really done much of anything, which is a real problem. We need to wake up, smell the roses, and start looking at strategic reserves of minerals around the world and start going around and doing the same thing they are, or we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation.
No, but Dan, the interesting thing, and I don't know what Shaquille's thoughts are about this, or even Lee, but when I read about this article, apparently two administrations that are on the polar opposites of each other had actually been working to take concrete steps to encourage greater U.S. rare earth and other critical mineral mining and processing, because apparently both the Biden administration and the Trump administration have been doing work in that field. Now, we probably need to do
I haven't seen
more
it
work.
yet.
I'm sorry, Mark. We can't drill for oil, but then we can take rare earth minerals.
Yeah,
What am I missing?
It's more toxic
Hey,
to be mining rare earth minerals. Really, I mean, it destroys the land. I mean, it's harder to remediate all that. So,
It's even worse for the environment.
but it's good for the electrical.
It's good for electricity and everything.
Yeah.
But Shaquille, in the same article, and by the way, this article came from
Yes, it
Fox.
doesn't count.
That shows that I do read different sources and everything. Apparently, Australia is mining rare earth minerals as well, but they're not processing them in Australia. They're processing them in Malaysia, although it still sells a significant portion of its output to Chinese customers as well. So apparently, y'all have jumped on board with this whole mining of rare earth.
Must not need it that bad.
The whole green movement, right? So we don't want to process stuff here because that's bad for the worldwide climate. So we ship it somewhere else and then bring it back.
Yeah, that works.
Just moving the smokestack. That's all it's doing.
That's the ticket.
That's the ticket. Just move the subject from one place to the other. Yeah, that's what we seem to be doing. It's just going from one place to the other.
That's why I think hydrogen is a better idea, right? As an alternative fuel. It's plentiful. It doesn't pollute the environment. It's not as disruptive to the automobile industry. It could easily, the infrastructure for hydrogen could be easily created. We're wasting our money on the electrical. We already have stress on our electrical grids. Why in the hell are we investing so much into this technology that is doomed to fail? Because
you know why? There's money to be made in those hills. What's the downside with hydrogen?
Pardon?
Why are they not going there?
I don't know. I just don't. I mean, it has been expensive to produce it in the past, but newer technologies are making it easier to extract it, store it, ship it, do all the things that you would normally do with gas. I mean, it's a clean energy source, and it's environmentally friendly. So I don't get it. I guess it depends. I guess the deals were made already with the electric car industry. Now, however, Toyota is coming up with a hydrogen-powered car. Hydrogen-powered cars have existed for 30 years, my friend. The technology has been around forever. I remember back in the 1980s or the 1990s, early 1990s, that University of Florida, Central Florida, in Orlando, had a site over on the coast that was doing hydrogen cars and that kind of thing. So, I mean, technology has been around forever. It's making it, affordable. That's the issue, and that's becoming a thing that is happening. Now, the other thing we're seeing is nuclear fusion is coming closer to reality. And when, that's the sort of it's not free because the plants to produce nuclear fusion are very expensive. But the technology is expensive, but it is a clean energy and it is sustainable and it produces massive quantities of power. And that's good. They're also looking at using old mining shafts as storage batteries and that kind of thing for electrical, power storage. And so there's all kinds of things that they're doing to try to solve this problem. Now, Shaq knows more about it than I do because he's international president of the Green Alliance. But I mean, I'm just sharing some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it is really important that we look at nuclear as a more viable alternative to energy. I've talked about this time and time again on the show, and it's one of Fareed Zakaria's favorite quotes that he gives is an energy transition strategy. So what is really interesting is that we're getting 80% of our electricity from fossil fuels, and we cannot continue to invest in those fossil fuels while we're going so electric. We don't have the infrastructure in place. So two things is nuclear, which I think is great. And the other one that I never thought about was converting coal to natural gas.
That's being done.
Yeah, but that's a good way to reduce carbon emissions, right? And
right.
And so I think this is hopefully we'll see more of that. And then the final, which is the most important, is opening up our pipelines and not having to depend on these other countries for oil and being played like puppets, whether it's Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. And so I really think the Biden administration has failed in that regards, especially during this crisis, because because there is the foreign policy angle, right? I mean, the foreign policy angle is that if Putin keeps making money selling oil, he can keep doing what he's doing.
Yeah,
because he knows that India is going to buy it, China is going to buy it, all these countries are going to buy oil. 25% of Europe's oil is coming from Russia. So anyway,
the U.S. approved its first small nuclear project for the first time in many years. Several of those smaller nuclear plants are planned to come online in 2025. Now, nuclear reactors have become far more sophisticated. There are technologies now that prevent meltdowns, and there are technologies now that provide cooling and other strategies that, the sand storage and other things that make it literally impossible for you to have a nuclear accident. So it's things are improving in that realm. Nuclear was always a good way to go, but because of political resistance by the environmental left, we've lost years of development and time, all because people didn't have an open mind about exploring solutions about it, right? So it's interesting the left shifted back to nuclear as an option because the little girl in Sweden or whatever says we should go to nuclear, and then she's
the same little girl who was against it a few years ago.
Oh yeah.
Right? And then, how dare you to everybody else? Because like everybody else, they don't have solutions. Nuclear is going to help, sure, but the reality is that you need to have more things if you want to get to zero. And we need to actually.
You're not going to get to zero.
You have to realize that there's going to be environmental concerns no matter what you do. Hydropower seems like a really obvious thing to do for a lot of countries out there. India would be able to do that pretty quickly and pretty easily. The United States knows it can do it. The Hoover Dam produces a whole heap of electricity. So focusing on things like hydro and geothermal in places where it can be done makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah.
Nuclear can make sense in some places. France has certainly been able to reduce, not just reduce its emissions, but also actually reduce the cost of providing electricity because they went nuclear, as opposed to Germany right next door, whose electricity prices have gone up because they've tried to use solar panels and wind farms. But nuclear is one technology. There is a whole heap of others that I think are actually even more preferable. But finally now we're beginning to see people realize that you can't just put wind farms up, solar panels, and then when people complain about it, say, well, you're obviously racist because it disproportionately affects people of color. So we're going to build solar farms out in the middle of the desert. We're going to put more wind farms up
because they don't
kill the eagles and kill all the endangered birds. We're going to ignore the fact that that's happening, and then we're going to sit there and complain when things haven't actually been reduced. Then we're going to go back to oil, and you know what we'll do? We'll net zero because we'll go plant some trees in Africa. I think a better solution is to focus on technologies that actually work.
I think we should sing a song about trees in Africa now.
Yeah, probably.
We're gonna sing a song about trees in Africa. Well, I think that y'all will enjoy this just because I'm gonna have a little bit of fun with Shaquille and everything. But the favorite person of the left, and I am being slightly sarcastic when I say that, has got a statement about what she learned in race and climate and how they are tied together. That being the lovely Jane Fonda. So we'll see what Jane Fonda got to say. What
Annoyed
you folks
Jane, yeah.
I know Jane.
I remember her.
Jane Fonda.
Yeah, Lane Fonda.
Was she married to someone famous? Oh, Ted Turner. That's right.
Yeah,
Ted Turner, CNN.
Ted Turner's still alive?
I believe
I don't
so.
You do?
phobia, whatever
I think
it's
so.
the war.
wasn't.
And if you really get into it and study it and learn about it and the history of it and everything's connected. There'd be no climate crisis if it wasn't for racism.
How do you get to that? Tell me.
Where would they put the where would they put the poison and the pollution? They're not going to put it in Bel Air. They've got to find some place where poor people or indigenous people or people of color are living. Put it there. They can't fight back.
You're so stupid.
And that's why a
Jane.
big part of the climate movement now has to do with climate justice.
Oh, you're such an idiot. You know, the older it gets, the stupider.
Jane Fonda.
Why doesn't she volunteer her backyard?
No way, Jane.
Hey,
I don't
maybe
know.
she should volunteer her
See,
backyard.
but and see, this is what I'm talking about, right? I know you want to shut me down, but people don't know what they're talking about. They cherry pick information out, and then when you call them on it, they get upset. Like
Oh, it's
you
on
did
the
earlier,
view, though, probably, right?
and they get upset because they're like, "Whoa," right?
That
And
lightning
so, but
bunch
these
of
are the
women.
same people that advocate for this sort of shit to be, shoved down the throats of our young people. So, our young people who don't know any better, okay, who come through elementary school, they learn, well, there's big racist conspiracy, and that's why the climate change, and then they want to take healthcare rights away from women.
But I wouldn't
And-
exactly call
and it just
Kelly
keeps
Clarkson
going like
or
that
Fox
from
News to
elementary
be
school into high
the
school.
liberal bastions of media. And that was actually
It
Kelly
goes
Clarkson.
like that from middle school
Kelly
into
Clark.
from elementary
Yeah,
school
that
into
was
middle
on the
school,
Kelly
then high
Clarkson show.
school, and then these kids graduate high school and they go off to some white college, and they graduate, and this is what they believe, right?
Well, I'm gonna
And
get
then you
this
say, well,
populace
what would you
junk
like
by
to do
these
about it? And they go,
No
well,
logic in it.
I don't know what to do about it, but it's a problem. Let's go protest.
Well, we can go
And then
move
you
it.
protest.
But
What
Shaquille-
change do you want to see? And
We
they
can
don't have
move
an
it to
answer.
indigenous
Shaquille, you
land.
have to admit that a lot of times what her point was that a lot of times the places that we choose to put places at are in poor and minority communities, and I did say poor intentionally.
Poor communities, not necessarily minority.
What do you mean by what a lot of the time we choose to put things somewhere?
Because the land is
What do you
cheap.
mean by that?
Like
We
if
choose
you're,
to
going to
chooses.
put, if you're going to put a nuclear power plant, you're probably going to put it somewhere that's either far off a side, which is what they've done in North Carolina. Sharon Harris is off in the country somewhere and
Yeah.
everything. Or there are sometimes that you will put them in areas that you feel that aren't going to fight back, as she just said, and everything. So sometimes
Well,
they
is
are
it
put-
they're not
and
going
that
to
can
fight
even be
back,
said
or is
about
it- or is
prisons.
it that it's
Because a lot
going
of
to
times
be?
prisons are put in
Is
poor
it that
neighborhoods.
they're not going to? Is it they're not going to be able to fight back, or they're not going to be interested in fighting back, or is it that it's more cost effective to do that? If you think, Mark, that it makes financial sense to go and put a nuclear plant in, Orange County or Newport Beach, California, go for it.
I
But
think
I
we got to
tend
put
to-
one right
I
next to
tend
the
to think
CNN.
Gotta get ready
But
to
rural
close out.
California is going to be a little cheaper than trying to do it in Newport. If you think that Florida is going to sit there and go down to Miami Beach and say, what we'll do,
Yeah.
we'll put a big industrial complex down here, right on the waterfront. If you think that that's what they're going to do, there's something wrong with you.
No,
Of
but on the
course they're
flip
going
side-
to go
but
to
on
the
the flip
cheapest
side of that,
places
do
they
you think
can.
that they're not intentionally doing things with the Flint water or things in Louisiana because of the type of economy and places that are in those
Well,
areas?
who's in charge of the water at Flint?
Not
Not at all.
so I can tell
Not
you
at
they
all, Mark.
intentionally
Of
dumped
course-
that
of
because
course
that was
they-
a
I gotta
poor
close
Of
out.
course they're
area.
doing that, and they're doing that because those people are poor.
Steve, you have to
They're
grab the
not doing
mic.
it saying-
I just said
they're
poor.
not doing
I
it
have to- I
saying,
have to
oh,
leave.
they're black. So
You have to
therefore,
grab the
they're
mic away from them.
Poor and black. It's a poor and minority.
Guys,
And
I'm
what
going
does
to
that
go ahead
have
and
to
go
do
for
with
close
climate
out. Mark,
change?
bring me on solo. I've got to close out today. I've got to run.
No problem.
We're out
And
of
I
time.
guess we'll get to Memphis tomorrow. I do know that Leah adds that in there. There have been some issues around the Memphis
Going
police
to
and Memphis crime. I think it involved a skateboarder and things of that nature. But I will find out more about that, and we'll talk about that on tomorrow. So I was aware of that, Lee. And I
It involved the unfortunate death of a citizen. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It
I'll try
definitely
to
was
be here
that.
tomorrow. I may be leaving early, but I wanted to wish you all a great week. I'm going to close out real quick. First of all, I want to end my monologue today with an inspiring evening yesterday where I had a time to celebrate, welcome the mayor of Hyderabad, India, Mrs. Gadwal Vijaya Lakshmi. It turns out that she's a relative of somebody that lives in Raleigh, the Goli family, and it's amazing the connections that sometimes you can build with international communities. In this case, Hyderabad, which is the 5th largest city in India and a hub of technology and life science innovation in India. Many people from Hyderabad live in Morrisville and Cary and around North Carolina. And in this instance, we were able to sit down with this mayor, a young, dynamic lady who lived in North Carolina for 17 years, moved back to India because her father was a senator there, and relinquished her U.S. citizenship, became an Indian citizen, and here she is years later as a young, dynamic mayor, a rising star. She talked a lot about what she could learn on this visit. It wasn't an official visit. She wanted to learn about sustainability, wanted to learn about green, did think that there was an opportunity for Sister Cities program in Raleigh, and does think there's time for collaboration between North Carolina or any state in the United States with India in areas of trade, commerce, economic development, foreign direct investment coming in from India, and also exporting to an emerging market. I see tremendous opportunities, but I ended my evening with a young, dynamic leader, which really got me thinking of the new India, a new India which is young, ready to move, excited about their future. And I think Prime Minister Modi is ready to continue to accelerate India's path to economic prosperity and a major seat at the stage of world diplomacy. Only time will tell. But it was an inspiring evening, and it shows me that connections across the world sometimes are what we need to build relationships and make a difference. We wish the mayor all the best in her meeting with our governor, Roy Cooper, tomorrow morning, and hopefully we'll welcome her back officially later this year or next year to North Carolina. From our family to yours, happy India Republic Day, happy Australia Day, be safe, and we'll be back next week or tomorrow for our final week edition, wrapping up the week. Thank you all so much. This is Steve Rouse signing off. Make it a great day.